See, it'd be interesting if that theory of mind is what leads to consciousness in the way we think about it, is the richness of the subjective experience that is consciousness. I have a inkling sense that only exists because we're social creatures. That doesn't come with this, with the hardware and the software in the beginning. That's like that's learned as an effective tool for communication almost. Like I think we think that consciousness is fundamental, and maybe it's not. There's a bunch of folks kind of criticize the idea that the illusion of consciousness is consciousness, that it is just a facade we use to help us construct theories of mind. You almost put yourself in the world as a subjective being, and that experience, you want to richly experience it as an individual person so that I could empathize with your experience. I find that notion compelling, mostly because it allows you to then create robots that become conscious, not by being quote unquote conscious, but by just learning to fake it till they make it. Is creative, present a facade of consciousness, with the task of making that facade very convincing to us humans, and thereby it will become conscious. I have a sense that in some way that will make them conscious if they're sufficiently convincing to humans. Is there some element of that you that you find convincing?
This is a much harder set of questions and deep end of the pool than starting with the aliens was.
We went from aliens to consciousness. This is not the trajectory I was expecting, nor you. But let us walk a while.
We can walk a while, and I don't think we will do it justice. So what do we mean by consciousness versus conscious self-reflective awareness? What do we mean by awareness, qualia, theory of mind? There's a lot of terms that we think of as slightly different things, and subjectivity, first person. I don't remember exactly the quote, but I remember when Sam Harris wrote the book Free Will, and then Dennett critiqued it. And then there was some writing back and forth between the two, because normally they're on the same side of kind of arguing for critical thinking and logical fallacies and philosophy of science against supernatural ideas. And here, Dennett believed there is something like free will. He is a determinist compatibilist, but no consciousness, and a radical eliminativist. And Sam was saying, no, there is consciousness, but there's no free will. And that's like the most fundamental kinds of axiomatic senses they disagreed on, but neither of them could say it was because the other one didn't understand the philosophy of science, or logical fallacies. And they kind of spoke past each other. And at the end, if I remember correctly, Sam said something that I thought was quite insightful, which was to the effect of, it seems, because they weren't making any progress in shared understanding, it seems that we simply have different intuitions about this. And what you could see was that what the words meant, right, at the level of symbol grounding, might be quite different. One of them might have had deeply different enough life experiences that what is being referenced, and then also different associations of what the words mean. This is why, when trying to address these things, Charles Sanders Peirce said the first philosophy has to be semiotics, because if you don't get semiotics right, we end up importing different ideas and bad ideas right into the nature of the language that we're using. And then it's very hard to do epistemology or ontology together. So I'm saying this to say why I don't think we're going to get very far is I think we would have to go very slowly in terms of defining what we mean by words and fundamental concepts.
Well, and also allowing our minds to drift together for a time so that our definitions of these terms align. I think there's a beauty that some people enjoy with Sam, that he is quite stubborn on his definitions of terms without often clearly revealing that definition. So in his mind, he can, like, you could sense that he can deeply understand what he means exactly by a term, like free will and consciousness. And you're right. He's very specific in fascinating ways that not only does he think that free will is an illusion, he thinks he's able, not thinks, he says he's able to just remove himself from the experience of free will and just be like for minutes at a time, hours at a time, like really experience as if he has no free will. Like he's a leaf flowing down the river. And given that, he's very sure that consciousness is fundamental. So here's this conscious leaf that's subjectively experiencing the floating, and yet has no ability to control and make any decisions for itself. It's only the decisions have all been made. There's some aspect to which the terminology there perhaps is the problem.
So that's a particular kind of meditative experience. And the people in the Vedantic tradition and some of the Buddhist traditions thousands of years ago described similar experiences and somewhat similar conclusions, some slightly different. There are other types of phenomenal experience that are the phenomenal experience of pure agency. And, like the Catholic theologian but evolutionary theorist Teilhard de Chardin describes this, and that rather than a creator agent God in the beginning, there's a creative impulse or a creative process. And he would go into a type of meditation that identified as the pure essence of that kind of creative process. Mm-hmm. And I think the types of experiences we've had, and then the types of experiences we've had make a big deal to the nature of how we do symbol grounding. The other thing is the types of experiences we have can't not be interpreted through our existing interpretive frames. And most of the time, our interpretive frames are unknown even to us, some of them. And so this is a tricky topic. So I guess there's a bunch of directions we could go with it, but I want to come back to what the impulse was that was interesting around what is consciousness and how does it relate to us as social beings, yes, and how does it relate to the possibility of consciousness with AIs.
Right. You're keeping us on track, which is wonderful. You're a wonderful hiking partner. Okay. Yes. Let's go back to the initial impulse of what is consciousness and how does the social impulse connect to consciousness? Is consciousness a consequence of that social connection?
I'm going to state a position and not argue it because it's honestly like it's a long, hard thing to argue, and we can totally do it another time if you want. Mm-hmm. I don't subscribe to consciousness as an emergent property of biology or neural networks. Obviously, a lot of people do. Obviously, the philosophy of science orients towards that in not absolutely, but largely. I think of the nature of first person, the universe of first person, of qualia as experience, sensation, desire, emotion, phenomenology, but the felt sense, not we say emotion and we think of a neurochemical pattern or an endocrine pattern. But all of the physical stuff, the third person stuff, has position and momentum and charge and stuff like that is measurable, repeatable. I think of the nature of first person and third person as ontologically orthogonal to each other, not reducible to each other. They're different kinds of stuff. And so I think about the evolution of third person that we're quite used to thinking about, from subatomic particles to atoms to molecules to on and on. I think about a similar kind of and corresponding evolution in the domain of first person, from the way Whitehead talked about kind of prehension or protoqualia in earlier phases of self-organization into higher orders of it, and that there's correspondence, but that neither like the idealists do we reduce third person to first person, which is what idealists do, or neither like the physicalists do we reduce first person to third person. Obviously, Bohm talked about an implicate order that was deeper than and gave rise to the explicate order of both. Nagel talks about something like that. I have a slightly different sense of that, but again, I'll just kind of not argue how that occurs for a moment and say, so rather than say, does consciousness emerge from, I'll talk about, do higher capacities of consciousness emerge in relationship with? So it's not first person as a category emerging from third person, but increased complexity within the nature of first person and third person co-evolving. Do I think that it seems relatively likely that more advanced neural networks have deeper phenomenology, more complex, where it goes just from basic sensation to emotion to social awareness to abstract cognition to self-reflexive abstract cognition? Yeah. But I wouldn't say that's the emergence of consciousness. I would say it's increased complexity within the domain of first person corresponding to increased complexity. And the correspondence should not automatically be seen as causal. We can get into the arguments for why that often is the case. So would I say that obviously the sapient brain is pretty unique. And a single sapient now has that, right? Even if it took sapiens evolving in tribes based on group selection to make that brain. So the group made it. Now that brain is there. Now, if I take a single person with that brain out of the group and try to raise them in a box, they'll still not be very interesting, even with the brain. But the brain does give hardware capacities that, if conditioned in relationship, can have interesting things emerge. So do I think that the human biology, types of human consciousness, and types of social interaction all co-emerged and co-evolved? Yes.